So before I get started and we're talking about what is strategic formulation, I just thought I'd tell you a bit about my experience of being a CEO and reporting to a board and being a president of a board as well. So it gives you quite different perspectives and it's useful to help check in with yourself about the different roles that you're playing. One of the big things that we see happening is that often people get confused with strategy and they are often a bit disenchanted. They might have been down a path of strategic planning where, they all took time out on the weekend to focus in their energy and efforts and develop a vision into the future. And they've come away feeling like they really didn't get past just what the vision statement was. You might have experienced that. So really what we're here tonight to talk about is ways that you can really fine-tune your vision and your mission as an organisation and make the choices to create the future for the communities that you're there to serve. So ultimately that's our job there as directors or as senior leaders in your organisation. And I can just briefly tell you as well about an experience I had when I was in a strategic planning session recently with a team of fantastic, very inspiring not-for-profit organisation people. And I asked them how their last strategy went and what was useful about it and what worked and what didn't. And they sort of all looked around and said, well, actually, we didn't really understand it. It was so sort of high level that, in fact, the information didn't actually make sense. So what we're going to talk about now are ways to make your formulation of your strategy integral to the way that you work every day, the way that you live and breathe your values, the way that you deliver your services to clients or consumers, and the way that you function from a point of abundance, not a point of scarcity. And we often see that people are fixated on the point of view that isn't going to be very helpful for them. So we'll now just move to the next slide. So there's some key elements in strategic planning, and these are things that you can do yourself. You don't have to engage an external person, but if you do, this is the methodology that we use, and it is really, really effective. We do thousands of strategic plans with boards from all across Australia, New Zealand and overseas. And the key elements in the strategic planning is really understanding who the team is. Often, boards might look at the CEO to lead the activity or the project, and the CEO might look towards the board to do it. But in fact, the best team, or the best planning team, is both the senior staff, not just the CEO, the senior leadership team, and in your organisation, if it's quite small, it might not necessarily be someone who's in a very senior role but plays a pivotal role. It's obviously the board. The board owns strategy. The board is responsible for delivering on that as part of their role and responsibility of being a director. And also 2 to 3 key stakeholders whose point of view matters. So by that we mean it could be people who actually don't really necessarily understand fully what you do. They might be people who are key people of influence in your community. They could be from local council. They could be from other organisations in the same sector as you. They could even be sponsors or major stakeholders. The key thing is, though, it's about choosing people who have a participation and a contribution that they can make that is meaningful and valuable. It could be consumers if you have consumers involved, but we're really looking for people who can make a strategic contribution. What we suggest is a really good approach is to use a survey initially. Now, this goes out prior to the actual strategic planning day taking part. And that's 5 key questions. The 5 key questions you really want to focus in on is looking at the vision and mission. And what is it about the vision and mission that rings true, that makes sense, and that enables you to continue to plan towards the future? You also want to know what are some of the strengths of your organisation from other people's point of view. We also suggest that you ask people about weaknesses and risks. Now, why do we ask about risks? Well, if it's a threat, people get scared of them and they don't know what to do with them. And risks are something that you can actually leverage and quite possibly make money from. The other thing that you can consider in these surveys is also looking at a different way of doing things and getting people involved. And we find that the survey response rate is about 75%, which is really fantastic. So when it comes to an actual planning day, whether you have a facilitator or whether you have a key member of your team who actually does the facilitation, you want to have your strategic planning team assembling at about 9 o'clock. And this is a full day event. This is definitely not an event that's going to just take part in half a day and be done and dusted. And I'll go through the structure of that event in a moment. So pretty much the planning team is involved from 9 till 2:30, and obviously you need to feed and water people along the way so that you get their best thinking. At about 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock, that's when the CEO, the chair and the facilitator do the operationalisation of the action plan. What we also find is quite difficult and challenging for people is that they spend time doing the strategic plan, and then the CEO has to then go and work with their team to try and work out not only how can they action it, but what are the measurable outcomes that they want to achieve. So what we do is we focus in on developing key performance indicators that are measurable and that the senior leadership team can report back to the board throughout the year. So in the beginning of the strategic planning session, you'd want to look at your vision and reaffirm whether it's, or actually strengthen it with new ideas and new ways of expressing it. And the landscape changes, so sometimes vision statements might not resonate in the way that they used to, or they might not reflect the new intentions of the organisation. So you want to spend about 40 minutes on that and really limit it to that period of time. The reason being is you've got other things that you need to focus on, and don't worry about wordsmithing it. There's people in that group who will be able to come up with fantastic key phrases that will really, everyone will feel like there's an aha moment, and it will just embody the values and the mission of your organisation in a succinct way. You can also do scenario planning, and that's really ensuring that you're being strategic. What we suggest is using possibility casting. So that is, what are the things that could happen, are likely to happen, and if they do, what impact and opportunity will that present to us? And that's looking at all aspects, technology, innovation, economic, social. The SWOR analysis is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and risks, and that's about an hour spent on that analysis. And you'll get the content especially from the survey, but you'll be able to generate ideas together as a group. It's good to use the surveys as a bit of a litmus test, because invariably there might have been something that you've missed out, and it's a good way to check in and make sure that there's not something obvious that you've overlooked. And the next thing is to look to map this against the survey results. That's a quick 10-minute overview, and make sure that there's nothing missed. And look then at the top 4 or 5 things that you've got to deliver on your vision, and deal with those scenarios and address those major strengths, weaknesses and opportunities and risks. So the key elements in strategic planning to operationalise the plan, as I said before, sometimes people feel that they've come away from the strategic planning session unclear and unsure of what actually this means. And often if there's paid staff involved in the strategic planning, some of the things that they're thinking is, well, how am I going to make that fit in with all the other things I have to do? You might have strategic planning also coinciding with major things like an accreditation review or something like that. So the key things with the action plan is also to consider what are the ethical implications of this. And ethical implications also mean that you're wanting to consider really how this is going to have benefits, and what are the considerations you need to make for your community. So at 3 o'clock, when the rest of the team leave, this is going to be a smaller group session with both the CEO, the board director, the chairperson or the president, as well as the facilitator. And that's where you can have more in-depth discussions and make sure that you have key performance indicators that enable you to measure the goals of the strategic plan throughout the year. And looking at the risk issues, risks is not just a way to mitigate and manage things, it's also, you can give consideration to ways that you can leverage it. And there might be some risks that you could actually deliver other income benefits that you might not have thought of. And the key thing as well is to consider how you're going to launch the strategy. We see lots of great strategic plans that don't get really rolled out to the organisation and indeed the stakeholders. And in fact, one of the questions we had before the webinar commenced was, how can I actually embed the values of my organisation in our strategic plan? Well, when we talked about the vision, that needs to reflect your values, but also when you talk about the actions and the intentions, that also needs to reflect your values. And we also recommend that part of the launch strategy is after the draft plan has been reviewed by the CEO and their senior team, and they might fine-tune that, it goes back to the board for endorsement and approval. Now, if there's a few things that still need a bit of tweaking, and that's okay, but one thing we see happen frequently is when the board might hold up on the strategic plan and the staff feel that they're sort of in a bit of limbo. So even if the board endorse it in principle, it enables the CEO and their team to actually get on and continue to flesh out the details, or perhaps come back with more information, even a business case if that's required. And the reporting frameworks are absolutely essential, and there's different ways that you can do that. You can also embed that in a dashboard type report, but the key thing is once your strategic plan is developed, you then need to roll that out into all aspects of your organisation, and that includes volunteers. And that requires a strategic conversation with their supervisors and staff within the organisation about how they can align their goals and their duties and their responsibilities with the strategic plan and how they can achieve on that. So that's a short summary there about the strategic formulation.